Well, hello, my name is Bill Humber. It's another season of our Green Citizen videos that we're doing at Seneca College. It's my great pleasure to have John Van Nostrand of the company S small v large N. And John is an architect planner, but really is a man of practical science. Maybe that's the best way we can put it. John has worked all over the world in a variety of different settings and situations. And obviously, the environment plays a role in every setting in which you work as a professional, but so do the people that live there as well. And so we've talked today about Canada's Boreal Corridor. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could just summarize for us what the challenges associated with the Boreal Corridor and where these ideas come from.
Well, I think it's pretty fundamental. We have a chance. We're in a growing country that you've told me earlier is going to go from 30 to 100 million. I won't be around that long, but I'll be around to see the region I live go in from 9 to 14 million. And we have the same challenges we've had in all the other parts of Canada of how do we deal with people who are already living there, and they tend to be predominantly Aboriginal, but not only Aboriginal people in the Boreal Forest, in the Boreal Corridor. But we also have to deal with the nature that's there, the topography, and the fact that because the resources are there as well, 70% of our resources are in this corridor, we can't just ship them somewhere else and send all the money to Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton. We need to make major improvements in situ. So that's a huge challenge and a scary one. And I think that you really need to, that means we've got to balance things and learn how to be practical in doing so. So we have to address these key issues now face to face. We don't have a choice. The longer we talk about it, the worse it'll get. But of dealing with a very important, very large forest area, and the fact that people are already misusing it for resource extraction. But notwithstanding that, we're going to have a lot of people moving there, certainly in the next 30, 50, 100 years. So how are we going to balance the two? And I think it's important that we look at them together. I think there was an overemphasis on sort of urbanization, if I can call it that, for a long time. And now there's been a kind of counter-emphasis on greening, not just urbanization, but greening, keeping what is green. I think they've both gone to extremes, and we need to come back to a middle ground where you think of them both together, because both need to reinforce each other. We have an enormous impact on our ecology, our natural ecology, and it has enormous impact on us. And we both change in the process. We're in I think it's called the Anthropocene age, the first time where man is one of the major influences of the world that he's trying to describe and live in. And we did an Anthropocene approach, I think, that recognizes the values of both. And these are not theoretical. They've been for the last 30 years or 40 years, thanks to Greenpeace and organizations like that who put them on the table, or the people who at Oka who did so as well, or at up in Lake Huron. Now we need to have answers. We need to get practical about it, and I think that we're ready to do that. Somehow I came out of an era where all the professions were divided up, and I've spoken here today about the need to bring them together to do this, and that means a new education system. But we can't wait for that. We also just have to do it, and I think the key to that, as somebody said, is collaboration, not just in approaches or in the sciences or in the arts, but also talking together about these problems and seeing we've already got answers. We're already doing a lot of things right, and we need to talk about those. We need to understand our history, which we don't. I think that's a critical issue we have. I think history should be mandatory, in fact, at school because of this, because I think it teaches us so much. And if you don't understand history, you can't really make things effective. I went into architecture and planning because I call it applied history. I make things, whether I like it or not, that last a long time. And I want to make sure that the good parts of them last as long as they can. But I also understand that I'm only making a framework. It's the people who will develop within that framework. It's not me who's going to make all those decisions. And it's all of us together. And so it's a really important and interesting time, Bill, for you to be running this series and running it at a college level, which is sort of also very much a function of the way we've told the world that my best friend was streamed into a 4-year high school program because he wasn't considered that smart, and I was considered smart, and I got 5 years. He became the publisher of the Ottawa Citizen. And he's told his worst case was English. So we've got that. That's just, here we are sitting in a big version of that now, and so that's part of it.
Now, some people would say we know the boreal forest is an important carbon sequester.
Yeah.
And they would perhaps argue maybe we should just put a big fence around the whole thing, and that's incredibly naive, obviously, because there's already things and people living there, and particularly First Nations. Talk to us about First Nations that are living there and some of the challenges that they're having.
Well, I think the challenge is they're actually making a lot of progress, more progress than we are on their side. And I think, because as I say, I mean, you just have to read John Ralston Saul or people like that, and they're telling us, and going to the conferences as well, that they're working through the law. They realize, they know the history intimately. They experienced it. They don't forget it. And they therefore know that you have to go to the base course, and that's law. That's outside government. And it's quite true, I believe, because the form of government we had is that of a colony, essentially. I honestly believe that. I used to keep it in my head, and lately because it helps me, and I think it would help all of us to understand what does that resulted in. So I think the First Nations are doing what they need to do. They're going to courts, they're standing up, they're taking charge. We can already see in the areas of Canada where treaties didn't exist, or lower forms of treaties, that they're entering into the economy quite successfully. In Upper Canada, and then the pre-Confederation Canada, we're stuck with some pretty rigid treaty arrangements that really disempower completely the original peoples. And it all goes back to they consciously dislocated them from their original lands. As far as I understand what happened in my reading of history, and I think it's quite true because I've experienced it in Africa and other parts of the world, which turns people into zombies, really, if you think about it. And they realize that, so now they want to take control of land and gain control of that and bring history together. And I think they're true partners, in particular, in the Boreal region.
There's an observation that of Jane Jacobs, obviously, that what makes for healthy communities is when you have lots of eyes on the street, as it were, in urban areas. And I would suggest perhaps the same could be said of our areas like the Boreal Forest. The more people that are engaged there, the more people that are there permanently, the more care they have for what's there. It's places like the Aral Sea where nobody was living around or looking at that suddenly disappeared.
Yeah.
Just speak to the importance of people living in a kind of a settled, permanent situation.
Yeah, I really agree. I think it's critical to have eyes on the world as well, on environment, in order to keep it as. There was a very interesting book, I was going to speak about that earlier, but called Megalopolis. It was done some years ago on the New York City region, and they discovered it had a higher percentage of wilderness than most other comparable regions, unsettled regions. Because, and I would say the same often is in a way true of Toronto. We have all these conservation lands which we're supposed to stay out of now because so that the Conservation Authority doesn't have to absorb the responsibility for flooding, which is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. And so we got it right in front of us. We don't even, our valleys are not part of our public day-to-day life. So we have to learn how to engage with those in ways that make us happier to be where we live and happier to leave that the way it is. Its main constituency at the moment, and I have to use this, and I don't mean to, but it just illustrates the situation so strongly, is that homeless people, if they really want to be homeless, go to the valleys to live because they'll be left alone. And gay people learned that very quickly thereafter because they know they're in an area that's not public space. and it doesn't have eyes on it. And I'm not saying eyes on it to keep them out. I'm saying we got to devise, we got two solitudes here. And the British gave us that. They hated nature. We don't even have we're on a Great Lake, we don't even have a relationship with it. People wonder, why is that? It's because the British didn't want us to, because it was uncivilized, uncontrollable. The French were already there. The native people were already there. You go back, you make a baseline, and everything in front becomes without tenure. So you just undermine the tenure. Frenchman's Bay, Pickering, was French until they surveyed the line back at Highway 2. So I just think Aboriginal people are ahead of us because they have to be. They're in revolt. I mean, but relatively peaceful, just given the numbers. If we were in South Africa, it would be what they experienced for tossing out the way things were. We have to somehow work at it together. But who better than we have a working relationship at least? We all sit at round tables. They told us about those. We all have this respect for nature. We learn from them. We're all, huge parts of us are half them in our blood. We're Métis Nation in many respects. And we're well off. We've got the time. We can see what's coming here. We can really demonstrate things that are very important for the world, people and environment.
John, thank you very much. This has been incredibly thought-provoking.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.